Greetings to those of you that are worshiping with us online. Thank you for joining us and being part of our service today. And last weekend, Pastor Eric did such a wonderful job opening this part of our values series where we've been talking about irrational generosity. And I want to start with a confession. The confession is this: for years when I've talked about irrational generosity here at Plum Creek, I've usually meant this, that we share a need and you respond. And listen, we've done that beautifully well. Over and over again, when we hear of needs, whether it be with a ministry partner or somewhere around this community, we just flat step up. But recently, most recently, in my preparation for what I want to share with you today, this weekend, I felt a deep challenge. And this is what it was. It was for me personally, but I also think it's for you. Generosity can't just be about responding. It needs to be a way of life. It needs to be a culture that you and I, that we embrace together. Because generosity is not supposed to be an occasional or sporadic move that we make. It literally is part of our discipleship. I've felt this and seen this in my own life. It's a big part of how we follow Jesus. And friends, making this part of our intentional journey with him is very important. So here's the refrain that I want to come back to a few times today. Irrational generosity, not as a slogan that we claim, but as steps that we take. And for the sake of this message, here's the way I'm going to frame it so you can follow along and know where I'm going. We're going to have some mile markers today on our journey, and we're going to have some checkpoints on our journey. So every mile marker is going to have a checkpoint. I will ask us to just do some reflecting together, because every journey, we need to make sure we're on the right path, right? And then we need to make sure that we're making progress and reflect and analyzing how we're doing. Now, perhaps some of you that were here last week thought this might be an unlikely place for us to start when we're talking about irrational generosity to, as Pastor Eric did last week, talk about irrational love. But actually, that is the right place, the best place. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a couple of minutes. And here's why this is so important. Irrational generosity doesn't begin with our resources. It begins with God's love. Let me say that one more time. Irrational generosity doesn't begin with our resource, it begins with God's love. When God's love takes roots in our hearts, it changes everything. And we've been talking about this a lot, and we're going to keep talking about it. There's some real exciting things coming around the corner for us as a church together where we hone in. We've just finished producing our second follow guide, and so we're going to be having a series where we walk through that, and you're encouraged to do that at home as well with the book that we've written. But this is the heart behind it all. If Jesus is right about the things that he said about God, about life, and about the soul, then it only makes sense, friends, for you and I to rearrange our lives around what he says is true. And what is it that we rearrange? Because I think in the culture we live in, we compartmentalize our faith. And we say it's good for Sunday, but we're not sure how it impacts all the rest of our lives. What is it that we rearrange? We rearrange lots of things, like our relationships and the energy that we're stewarding from our lives, the influence, our talents, the opportunities that we have, our time and our resources. And that's where the journey begins. So let me pause here for just a second. And before we jump in, I know some of you are like, why did I come to church today? Pastor's talking about generosity. And I know what happens because it happens in me too. There's things, we have all kinds of feels when we talk about this. And it stirs up lots of things: nervousness and conviction and defensiveness and challenge and guilt and sometimes even gratitude. But will you take a deep breath with me real quick? Take a deep breath. Let it out all at once. My prayer this week is this: none of those things would happen, but it would be a time where together we have feelings of self-reflection. Does that sound good? Because if we feel ourselves getting worked up about some of these things, maybe it would be important for us to slow down and ask ourselves, why? I've had to do this for myself too. Could it be that there's something that God is wanting to see surface? And I want to prove that to be true today, because I know this is how he works. And I'm right here with you. December 1st of this year will be my 20th year as pastor here. 20th year. And that's counting the days before we began, okay? That's from the drop when we started 20 years ago. And I knew that there were going to be times where I needed to talk about resources and generosity. And I got to tell you, that can cause a pastor anxiety. okay? And I don't love to be misunderstood. But yet at the same time, this is something that Jesus talked about a lot. And that's how I've gotten more courage to talk about this, because it's something that's impacted my life personally, to understand what it looks like to have irrational generosity in my life. But I used to get nervous about this and don't want to be misunderstood. But here's what I know. Jesus talked about it a lot. As a matter of fact, 40% of his parables talk about this. Why? Please hear me. Because it's not ultimately about our resources. It's about our hearts. It's about the way we follow Jesus. It's about our spiritual formation and God, how God can use this to form us. It's about our discipleship. And here's what Beth and I have found true. That's my wife, by the way, that we have found true in our lives together, that generosity is a barometer. And it measures in Beth and I how aligned our hearts are with him. And do you know that's something that Jesus said too? This is what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Have you ever experienced that? Let me give you an example. Let's say this week you have a friend who's a world-class salesman that comes up to you and says, listen, I've got a really hot tip for a long shot opportunity with some crypto that's full of opportunity, right? And you'd be like, okay, tell me more. And let's just say that in the conversation, they've done such a good job convincing you that this is something you should invest in. So you put a sizable chunk of resource into this crypto. And what's going to happen immediately after you do that? Suddenly, you're going to be checking your phone all the time, and you'd be looking at charts you don't even understand how to read, and you'd follow random crypto podcasts and crypto reports. And all of a sudden, what happens is you put your money into it, and your resource now pulls your heart to this newfound crypto passion, right? That is what would happen. Your focus, your attention follows right behind your investment. It's uncanny how fast our hearts can get tethered to wherever we put our treasure. Now, of course, that scenario that I just described, that would never happen, right? We would never do that, right? It's all hypothetical, I promise, right? So if you feel yourself having some feelings as we talk about this, I just want you to invite you to pause and just have a moment of self-reflection and ask why. Because when we talk about these things, whatever it is that stirs up inside of you, resistance, guilt, joy, whatever it is, it might just be pointing to something deeper. Listen to the voice of God today. God wants us to pay attention and very likely would want us to work on these things. So here's what I assure you. He is way more concerned about our hearts than he is about our resources. He doesn't need our resources. You know what he does need? You know what he wants most? Your heart. He wants your heart. Now, as we walk through this message together today, we're going to take a close look. Remember, I said this before, of mile markers and checkpoints. So walk with me here. A mile marker number 1, generosity is a journey. It is a journey. This is not something you wake up really good at. Generosity is a journey. Let me read to you what Paul said. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 7, he's talking to this church that he started, and he's going to commend them. And I want you to see what he commends them for, and then there's a challenge. This is what he says. Since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love from us, look at the last part of the verse. I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. Did you catch what he's saying here? Generosity is something that you can excel in. It's not a one and done. It's like these other areas, something that you grow in, just like faith and knowledge and love. We should all never be satisfied with the place that we're at in terms of our generosity. Excelling just never happens. You grow into it. So go back and look at what Paul said. He was commending his church for these things: faith and gifted speakers, knowledge, enthusiasm, and love. Now, there's a lot of areas there and many more that we're challenged to excel in. But as I read this verse, there's 2 that pop out for me personally because of the way Doug's hardwired. So Dougie has this passion for speaking, and Dougie has some enthusiasm. And those 2 things don't just come because you don't work at it. Those are things that you kind of grow in, especially that speaking one. I've told you before, you guys know, hopefully you know, like, I love to do this. Like, I'm made to do this. I love to speak. I was in 4th grade when I preached my first sermon. It's true. It was a horrible sermon. It was really horrible. but I sure had fun. I loved it. And so I've gotten better at that. I still remember vividly the first time he called himself a senior pastor, allowed me to preach on a Sunday night. I was just brand new, graduated from college. I was 21 years old, and I was doing an internship at a church in Waukegan, Illinois. And the pastor said, I would love for you to speak on Sunday night. I was like, oh man, I'm going to take this very serious. I promise. I prayed, I studied, I practiced over and over and over again. And I did the very best this 21-year-old green behind the ears guy who wanted to be a decent communicator could do. And then on Monday morning, the pastor called me into his office and I sat down across from that big desk and he said, Doug, this pastor, Doug, you did a pretty good job. However, if you ever use a euphemism at my church again, you'll never speak again. I was 21 years old, like nodding my head thinking, what is a euphemism, right? I have no idea. So I'm feeling a little embarrassed and not knowing at all what he was talking about. And I was like, well, Pastor, would you mind sharing with me what did I say? He said, absolutely. You said heck 9 times, and that's a euphemism for hell. I was thinking, boy, I'm glad he doesn't know my friends from college, right? And I felt embarrassed, and I said out loud, what the heck was I thinking? No, I'm just kidding. I didn't really say that. But here's what I decided. I better go start a church where it's okay to say heck, right? So I needed some grace from that pastor. I needed some grace from our God, and obviously a whole lot of practice. And speaking didn't just happen for me. It's taken, 30 some years of practice and failure and lessons learned and trying to get better at it and lots of good help and critique. And Paul is saying generosity is the same way. You don't just do it once and arrive. This is something that we learn to do. You grow into it, you stretch, you learn. And every single time that you do this, you can take a step towards excelling in it more, just like faith and knowledge and speaking and enthusiasm. And so this means we're all on a journey. And you will eventually get to a place. Here's what I've learned. And I don't get it right every time, I promise you this. But I can tell you for a fact this is true. If you practice this, there will be a day when you actually enjoy it. You will actually enjoy hearing from God, doing what he says, and feeling the reward in your soul because you did. And so for years, how do we practice this? For years, I've encouraged you, and this is something that I've done. I have a $100 bill in my wallet that is set apart. It's all God's anyway, right? Amen? But this $100 I set apart and I say, God, we have this thing. I want to learn to hear your voice. The $100 is for you. You tell me when, and I will invest this $100 wherever you tell me to do it in someone's life. And it's really important, I think. And I would encourage you to do this. Why? It's not about the money. It's about hearing God's voice, learning to hear his voice. And there's been all kinds of ways that I've felt and sensed God's prompting to use it. It doesn't have to be $100. It could be $50 or $20. But you just have it set aside, right? Because it's really weird if the Lord says, hey, they need help. And you're like, hey, bro, can I get your Venmo? Right? So many times we can't help because we're not ready. But when we do this, all of a sudden you will learn quickly that generosity is not about that bill that you've set apart in your wallet. It's about the journey of learning to listen to God's voice and trust him with your resources. So mile marker number 1, friends, is this. Generosity is a journey, and I invite you to get on the journey with me. Generosity isn't a single decision. It's a lifelong journey. You take one step, then another, and with every step, here's what is happening. God is shaping your heart. Now, there's a satisfaction that comes from doing this well that will far surpass anything else that you could purchase with your resource. I promise you. Sensing and knowing that you've done what God has told you to do and made a difference in someone's life, it's addicting. It's so fun to be part of what God wants to be done. So our first checkpoint is this. Have you started your generosity journey? Our culture tells us what you need to do is hoard. Make as much as you can and buy as much stuff as you can. Buy a bigger house and a sweeter car. Hoard, 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 right? And that's not what Jesus says. So have I started this generosity journey? And then another question would be, am I stuck? Am I stuck on the journey? Or do I continually say, God, it's all yours anyway. Help me to know what you want me to do. And perhaps God is inviting you today to join on this journey towards generosity. So the first mile marker is that generosity is a journey. The second one is this, goes back to where we started. Generosity's foundation is love. Generosity's foundation is love. I said earlier, irrational generosity doesn't begin with our resources. It begins with God's love towards us. Eric shared that last week. And here's the truth. His irrational love is the key and the foundation to understanding the heart of generosity. So let me show you how this is true. Jesus told us this in a verse that probably you have memorized. In John chapter 3, verse 16, for this is how God loved the world. Read the two words. What did he do? He gave. Oh, that was so enthusiastic. He gave. He gave. God's irrational love expressed itself in an irrational gift, and that's where it always starts. And so, friends, as you and I get to this place where we're connected to this way that he gave, his irrational love, the motivation, his big why behind it was you and I. And then when we see this and we begin to embrace his why, then we get to move forward in this path towards irrational generosity in a different kind of way. But you will never understand what it means to be irrationally generous until you've gotten to a place where you understand his irrational generosity towards you. It doesn't start with us. It will always start with God. Our Heavenly Father's irrational love expressed itself in the most irrational gift possible, his own Son. And until we receive that and understand that and connect to that love, it's going to be tough for us to understand this as well. God loved so much that he gave. So mile marker 2 is that generosity's foundation is love. See, here's what happens. If this isn't your foundation as well, then the journey will always stall out. Love is what anchors generosity. Without it, giving turns into an obligation and it's a duty instead of joyful. So as we pause here at this checkpoint of mile marker number 2, can I ask you a question? Have you truly experienced God's love in your life? Have you stepped across that line of faith, overwhelmed with his irrational generosity towards you? Because when you do, we begin to reorient our life, rearrange our life around the things that he says and the things that he's done. And then for those of you that have stepped across that line of faith, I think the next important question would be, are you staying tethered to it? Don't let it lose the sense of awe in your life for what he's done for you. His love and his generosity will motivate you. And if that truth loses its weight in your life, I don't think you can expect to walk a path of irrational generosity well. So mile marker number 3 is this, and this is why this is part of the way that we articulate this particular value. Generosity will seem irrational, right? You know this is true. It doesn't make sense. But I love the way we say this about our value. You would have to agree with this. The culture around us doesn't understand what it means to live irrationally generous. Generosity will seem irrational to the world around us. But this is where God shows up. Now, raise your hand if you know I'm not a prosperity gospel preacher. That better be every hand in this place. Can I see your hands up? So I don't want to get any emails this week, okay? You wouldn't be here if that's what I was doing. I believe that to be true. Please don't do that. And don't send me an email. I'm just going to read a proverb, okay? This is what the proverb writer said, but I want you to listen to this as it's communicated to us. Proverbs chapter 11, starting in verse 24. Give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. That's completely upside down to the world that you and I live in. But this is kingdom logic. What feels irrational to us is exactly where the blessings from God show up. And my wife Beth and I have learned this so many times as we discern what God is trying to say to us about living irrationally generous. And we don't get it right every time. But I can tell you when we do. And sometimes it's Beth. She'll come to me and she'll say, hey, Doug, I really feel like we're supposed to. And then she'll say, and I'm like, hey, if you feel like we're supposed to, then we're going to do it, right? If you feel like you've heard from God, we're going to do that. And the same is true on my side. That's completely upside down from the way the world tells us to live. But what we've learned is that the times when God has asked us to give, and there have been times, listen, honestly, it didn't make any sense at all. It did not work financially. And there is no financial planner on the planet that would say, I think this is a good idea, right? However, it felt crazy, but when we said yes, on the other side of that, we've seen God provide for our family. And I can tell you sometimes that's been financial. But there's also other things that happen. There's a peace that comes, and sometimes it's just sheer joy of watching another life be impacted. You see, God, I've never missed a meal, guys. You can tell. I've never missed a meal. We have always paid the mortgage on our house. I have no credit card debt at all. God provides. And yet we work hard to live irrationally generous. So generosity is always going to seem irrational. It doesn't make sense to the world around us, but I've learned this is where God shows up when we're on this path with him. So this story, I heard a story this week. A year or so ago, some of you might remember if you were here, I preached a message on the widow's mite. Some of you remember that? I gave everybody a replica of the widow's mite from the story in the Gospels. And just this week, I found out there's a Plum Creeker who took his widow's mite home and then glued it to the dashboard of his truck. Here's a picture of it on the LED wall. And why? He said, I did this on purpose because I need to be reminded every day to live generously. Isn't that awesome? And so today we were talking about this right before we came out in the first service. And one of the guys on the production team reached into his pocket and pulled out his money clip. And on his money clip, he had pasted the widow's mite too, to be a reminder to him to live generously as well. This is something we need to be reminded of because by default, you're not going to be generous. By default, you're going to follow the way of the world and the current around us, and you're going to live without generosity in your life. So checkpoint number 3 at this 3rd mile marker is this. When was the last time that generosity felt like a stretch of faith for you? When's the last time? Has it ever happened? Where you felt like the Lord told you to do something and you said, nah, it doesn't make sense. But you felt it strong enough in your heart that you said, okay, Lord, I'm going to do it. If you've never experienced that, I would love to encourage you. Start praying that you would hear the voice of God and be used by him in this way. So mile marker number 4 on this path that we're on together, generosity reveals my heart. We talked about it briefly before. In Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19, this is the whole context that I shared just one verse of before. Jesus says this, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. And then here's the sentence we read earlier. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. You see, at the end of the day, this journey is not about our resources. It's about our hearts. And Jesus says it clearly. Wherever your treasure goes, your heart's going to follow. And that's why when you finally give away that $100 bill or whatever it is that you've set apart, the one that you've been carrying, you realize it wasn't about the bill. It never was about the bill. It was about whether or not your heart would say yes to what he prompted you in. And you need to know too that generosity will never be measured by the size of your bank account or the size of your gift, but rather by the surrender of your heart. It's a lot harder when you see it that way, isn't it? What is it that we will surrender our hearts to? So checkpoint number 4 is this. I wonder if someone looked at my bank statement, what they would say it reveals about my heart. I wonder what they would say. Am I giving eagerly or reluctantly? And I've shared with you over the years, if you're new to Plum Creek, this will be good for you to know this. We've always been a church that cares very deeply about investing into what God's doing around the world. As a matter of fact, in the very early days of Plum Creek, before we'd even had a service, honestly, before we'd even moved to Castle Rock, but we knew that this is where God was leading us, there was a strong challenge that came to me personally, that before the church could even pay our salary, that we would start giving 10% of everything that came in right back out. And so we identified a couple of missions partners that we were passionate about. And one of our earliest partners was Project Rescue. You've heard us talk about that if you've been around. They're rescuing girls all over the world that are being trafficked. And we started giving 10% of everything that came in right back out. And that's been the way, as long as I'm doing this here, that's the way we're doing it. And we're making a difference because of that. And then if you've been at Plum Creek for a while, you know, if you haven't, you need to get ready for this. Starting the weekend of Thanksgiving, every single year, we do a special missions offering. And we set a lofty goal, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we trust God for everybody to be involved and to prayerfully consider giving 1 day's worth of your salary to an offering that goes right back out of the four walls of this church. And last year in 2024, when we combined those two things together, listen, because of your generosity, we were able to give almost $1.3 million away as a church. That's a lot of money, guys. So today you have a tangible opportunity with the child sponsorship partnership that we have. And if you haven't sponsored a child, I would encourage you to do that. Beth and I have 3. It's $44 a month. And I know what happens when we say that. You're like, oh, geez, another $44 a month. Hey, would you just for a second add up Hulu, Spotify, Apple Music, right? Keep going. There's more, right? YouTube TV. You know what they say now? We actually pay more a month for those entertainment things than we did when we just paid for cable. Remember when that was the pitch? Like, just you say, cut the cord. Just go like, everybody's streaming in my house now, right? And some of you might say, wow, that's a whole dinner out, Doug. Yes, it is. It's probably actually a little less than a dinner out. But you know what it does? It provides dinner for a kid on the other side of the world every day. That sounds pretty good. And what I can promise you is what seems like a sacrifice here, look at me, is transformational over there. I've seen it. And so today we have a few kids left that need to be sponsored, and I believe we'll probably be done. Let's wipe it out. Next service we'll have 0 opportunity because we're gonna get it all done here today. We had 150 at the beginning. So let me just ask you as we finish up, what is it that God's calling you to do on this path towards irrational generosity? For some of you, it's just to become a regular giver and to be part of what he's telling you to do, to support Plum Creek and to be part of what we're doing, both locally and globally. And for some of you, it's going to be to sponsor a child as you leave today. For some of you, it's going to be to just set aside a certain denomination of cash that you're going to keep in your wallet or your purse. And it's just a moment for you to stay sensitive to the voice of God. I promise when you do that, the first thing that'll happen, you'll be at a store and you're going to see a sale on something you'd really like to buy. And you're like, no, we've already decided that Hyundai stays right there until God speaks, right? But listen, friends, as we learn to be irrationally generous with the resources God's already given us, the joy that comes into our lives when we're part of making a difference in others, wow. Friends, it's addicting. And I know God is pleased because it's never been about the money anyway, is it? It's about your heart and mind. So let's do this together. It's not a slogan we claim. But friends, this is steps that we take. Can you bow your heads with me? Father, thank you today for a chance to reflect on these things. We thank you that you love us, you care about us, and you care about our resources even. But most of all, you care about our hearts. Lord, I pray for someone that's here today that hasn't yet stepped across the line of faith. We talked about how where that's the foundation for learning to live generously. And listen, friends, those of you that have already made that decision and stepped across the line of faith, will you begin to pray right now? For someone that's listening to my voice, perhaps worshiping at home or somewhere else, or right here today in this room that hasn't made that decision. If that's you and you're ready to understand and embrace the fact that God loves so much that he gave his son for you, that his son would go to the cross and to pay ultimately the price for all of the ways that we've fallen short of God's perfect standard. If that's you here today and you feel something in your gut and you know you need to respond, I invite you to step across that line of faith by simply with your words and with your heart saying, God, I need you in my life. I ask you to be the Lord of my life. I thank you for the price that you paid for me. And now will you please help me to orient my life, to rearrange my life on the things that Jesus said and the things that Jesus did. Lord, for all of us, will you help us to experience hearing your voice and responding? We love you so much. Thanks for caring about us like you do. And help us to care about the things you care about now too. We love you. In Jesus' name, and all God's people said, will you stand to your feet? If you were here last week, we sang a song for the first time here, and it's such a powerful song. My prayer as we finish is that you will not allow the words to just slip by without paying close attention, but that they would come from deep inside of you as you're reminded of this powerful truth.